catfights over handbags and tears in the toilets in women-only company. My sexist hiring practices came back to bite me in the rear. Over in one corner sat Alice, a strong-minded 27-year-old who always said what she thought, regardless of how much it might hurt someone else. In the other corner was Sarah, a 30-something high flyer who would stand up for herself momentarily, then burst into tears and run for the ladies. Their simmering fight lasted hours, egged on by spectators taking sides and fueling the anger. Sometimes, other girls would join in, either heckling aggressively or huddling defensively in the toilets. It might sound like a scene from a tawdry reality show such as Big Brother, but the truth is a little more prosaic. It was just a normal morning in my office. The venomous women were supposedly the talented employees I had headhunted to achieve my utopian dream. A female-only company with happy, harmonious workers benefiting from an absence of men. It was an idealistic vision swiftly shattered by the nightmare reality. Constant bitchiness, surging hormones, unchecked emotion, attention-seeking and fashion rivalry so fierce it tore my staff apart. When I read the other day that Sienna Miller had said there was no such thing as the Sisterhood, I knew what she meant. I can understand why people want to believe that women look out for each other, because with men in power, at work and in politics, it makes sense for us to stick together. In fact, there was a time when I believed in the sisterhood. But that was before women at war led to my emotional and financial ruin. 5 years ago, I was working as a TV executive producer, making shows for top channels such as MTV and based in Los Angeles. It sounds like a dream job, and it could have been if I'd been male. Working in TV is notoriously difficult for women. There is a powerful old boys network, robust glass ceiling, and the majority of bosses are misogynistic males. Gradually, what had started out as a daydream, wouldn't it be great if there were no men where I worked, turned into an exciting concept. I decided to create the first all-female production company where smart, intelligent, career-orientated women could work harmoniously, free from the bravado of the opposite sex. In hindsight, I should have learned the lessons of my past. At my mixed secondary school, I was bullied by a gang of nasty name-calling girls, so I knew only too well how nasty groups of women could become. And working in TV, I'd met lots of super competitive door slammers who'd do anything to get to the top. But I told myself that with the right women, work could be wonderful. So in April 2005, I left my job, remortgaged my house, freeing up close to £100,000, and began paying myself just £700 a month to set up this utopian business. Having worked extremely hard for 12 years, I had lots of experience and a good reputation. What could go wrong? I hired a team of 7 staff and set up an office in Richmond upon Thames, Surrey. While the women I interviewed claimed to be enthused by the idea, they still insisted on high salaries. Fair enough, I thought at the time. They are professionals, and I knew most of them were talented and conscientious because I'd worked with them before. But within a week, 2 cliques had developed. Those who had worked together before and those who were producing new ideas. Most days would bring a pointed moment when some people were invited out for lunch or a coffee break, and some weren't. Nothing explicit was ever said. The cutting rejection was obvious enough. Even when we all went to the pub after work, strict divisions remained, made clear according to who sat where around the table and who would be civil, or not, to whom. Fashion was a great divider, though in this battlefield, everyone was on their own. Hideously stereotypical and shallow as it sounds, clothes were a huge source of catty comments, from sly remarks about people looking overdressed to the merits of their fake tan application. I always felt sorry for anyone who naively showed off a new purchase in the office because everyone would coo appreciatively to their face, then harshly criticize them as soon as they were out of earshot. This happened without exception. My deputy, Sarah, the general manager, first showed how much style mattered when she advertised for an office assistant and refused to hire the best qualified girl because she could not distinguish Missoni from Marc Jacobs. This girl would have been making tea and running errands. But I didn't challenge the decision not to hire her because I had a policy of picking my battles carefully. The office was like a Milan catwalk, but with the competitiveness of a Miss World contest and the low cunning of a mud wrestling bout. A fashion spat ended one friendship when Sarah and our young development researcher received the same surprise Christmas gift, a Chloe Paddington bag worth £900. When they clocked the matching bags in the office, it was like pistols at dawn. They forced a few compliments, but relations never recovered, to the expense of my company. Another time, when two members of staff bought the same jeans, one proclaimed, "They'll look better on me because I'm a size 8 and she's a 10. It didn't take long for the office to become divided between the girls who wore makeup and those who didn't. Comments from the former were typically, "Doesn't she know what spot cover-up is?" Or, "Has she ever met a hairbrush?" While the no makeup clan were equally biting, with comments, behind their backs naturally, such as, "People on the morning bus must think she's a prostitute," or "She looks like a slapper." The obsession with appearance meant nearly all the staff were on diets. If I bought a tuna mayonnaise baguette for lunch, I would overhear staff commenting that I was pig. "I'm a size 12. Two of the skinny girls often snidely said about the largest girl, "I'd kill myself if I got that fat." One of the assistants got her own back on the food police for several weeks by pretending to buy them fat-free lattes, which were really full fat. Employees considered it acceptable to take time off for beauty treatments, and not out of their holiday allowance. One girl regularly came in late because she was getting her hair coloured, and when I mentioned this, she blew up in outrage. Though at least she had a reason. Most just turned up late regardless and huffed, "That's the time my train gets in," if I pointed at the clock. In hindsight, I can see I should have been more strict. My idealism was my downfall because I tried to see the best in people. I was convinced they would behave as they were treated, so I treated everyone kindly. If I'd have been more cynical, I would have been more successful. I was often out trying to win contracts, but back at the office, work was an afterthought. It came second to conversations about shopping, boyfriends, and diets. Oh, and spiteful comments from my two development researchers who were sharpening their acrylic nails against another staff member, Natasha. 6 months after the company's inception, tensions spilled over when one of the researchers took Natasha's laptop and refused to return it. That day, I was forced to cancel my meetings and return to the office to patch up relations. Though Sarah, my general manager, was present, she refused to get involved because she didn't want to be the bad cop. Despite being in charge, she was scared at the prospect of being bitched about. It was as though, in a women-only environment, staff were unable to keep their defined roles. Soon, arguments became a daily occurrence. It would start with snide comments between two people then, as others joined in. Emotion and anger would grow until an eruption. Shouting, screaming, swearing, which always left someone in tears. Then, the friends of the woman who was upset would follow her to console her, leaving one group in the office and another group in the ladies. Both would then bitch unreservedly about each other and do absolutely no work. It reached the point that I even wrote a handbook for staff on how to be nice to each other. The advice centered on being respectful to everyone and treating people equally, taking phone messages properly whether the call was for me or a junior. I also said there should be no more criticizing or whispering in the office. But although when people read it, they said they loved the idea, it made no difference. Many of the women were aggressive or defensive, or both. The most aggressive masked a host of insecurities with their outgoing nature, while the defensive ones opened up only when provoked. The worst type I encountered, however, was the passive-aggressive. She doesn't seem mean, but is the worst of the pack, ruthlessly bringing you down in such a sweet and unassuming manner that you don't realize what she's done until long after the event. She conceals her bitchy words in flowery phrases. One of my staff told another sweetly, "I don't mean to be a bitch, but I just can't bear to be in the same room and breathe the same air as you right now." But the biggest force wasn't personality type, it was hormones. When one woman started having IVF, she unleashed her rage without warning and without apology. At that time of the month, which in an office staffed only by women meant someone was always at that point, any bad mood was swiftly passed on to the rest of team as if by osmosis. Hormones came second as an excuse for absence and bad temper only to love life problems. When one woman split up with her boyfriend, I was told in no uncertain terms by her that I must be super understanding and sensitive towards her at work. In an email she sent me. A true drama queen, her tears went on for a week. Naturally, her enemies in the office delighted in her broken heart. Another girl, juggling 2 relationships at once, frequently primed everyone in the office about what to say to whom whenever either of the men called the office. Another woman had a voracious sexual appetite and, in a female-only environment, saw nothing wrong with screeching across the open-plan room details of her marathon sex sessions. I received frequent complaints about her crude language. I can still remember the name of all of my staff's partners and their affairs because it interfered with our work so often. Professionally, however, the company was somehow thriving. We secured 2 program commissions, one with ITV and a series with Living TV, so could afford new offices in West London. But this brought another explosion from Sarah when she paid out for a parking permit while another girl was given a free space by the building's landlord. During a massive row, Sarah said the girl had overstepped her rank, while the girl told her it was just tough. They never spoke again. The effect a lack of testosterone was having in our office was even more apparent when I temporarily hired 2 male directors to work on a series. Camera operators are usually men because of the heavy equipment. The team suddenly became quieter, more hard-working and less bitchy, partly because they were too busy flirting. 2 girls openly went after one director, even though he had a live-in girlfriend. His partner didn't stand a chance against their relentless flirting and was dumped when one of them won his affections. When we had meetings with men, staff turned ferocious, each out to prove that they were the sexiest in the room. With a male commissioner at Channel 4, one employee said, "Watch this!" then stuck a hand down her bra and tweaked her nipples. The man and I were speechless. In this climate, I didn't dare employ any men because of the distraction and, even worse, catfights they created. I hate how much that sounds like stereotyping, but I'm afraid it's what I found to be true. And while I stand by my initial reason for excluding male employees, because they have an easy ride in TV, if I were to do it again, I'd definitely employ men. In fact, I'd probably employ only men. Making close to $500,000 in our first year should have meant profit, but this was wiped out by high salaries and accounting errors by staff. Then, when we began having cash flow problems, Sarah signed herself off sick with stress for a month. She also confessed she'd been dodging calls from people who were due payment, thus ruining my firm's reputation. By then, I was back and forth on a plane between Britain and the US, dealing with fractious staff in London and balmy LA producers. My general manager was nowhere to be found. Bills hadn't been paid and the tension in the office was palpable. To pump extra cash into the business, I sold both my cars, but it was too late, and we went bankrupt in March 2007, less than 2 years after I'd formed the company. Though I will not absolve myself of all guilt, I believe the business was ruined by the destructive jealousy and infighting of an all-female staff. Their selfishness and insecurities led to my company's demise. When I needed the so-called sisterhood, believe me, it just wasn't there.
Goes to show that bad management knows no gender.
In one of my favorite books, The Coddling of the American Mind, Professor Jonathan Haidt tells the reader that men are more likely to do physical violence and women are more likely to do what he coins as social violence. Essentially, what he means is that women want to discriminate against other women, cut them out of their preferred friend groups, and cut the enemy women out of said enemy women's own friend groups vindictively. They are more subtle, passive-aggressive, they have more long-standing feuds, they aim to make the lives of women that they dislike extremely miserable, and they do not forgive or show mercy. I remember I had this history teacher back in high school that told me that in his 30 years of teaching, he saw a lot of boys get into fights, and most of them lasted about 20 seconds. He didn't see boys being anywhere near as passively cruel to each other as he saw the girls do. And he said the boys forgave each other most of the time for fights. When he saw girls fight, they would keep fighting until they were forcibly separated. Hair pulling, biting, nails aimed at the face, screaming and screeching. And they would have to be kept apart for the rest of their years at the high school because they never forgave.
As a librarian, I have worked in environments that were mostly female or entirely female with the exception of myself for over 20 years, and I have never before seen a workplace so divided by animosity. Each day was like walking through a minefield, as I had to remember who wasn't talking to whom. The worst of it was the hypocrisy so thick you could slice it with a knife. Yet through painful experience, I learned that my opinion counted for nothing, and if I dared to speak, I was mansplaining. I worked with strong, independent women who all came rushing to me if they had an angry patron. I learned that women were as guilty of all the same sins they accused men of. The only difference was that men had the insight to recognize their faults, whereas women lived in absolute denial. If a hot woman walked in, all the female staff watched me for the least reaction. Yet when a hot guy walked in, they were as lewd as any men in their comments. In the end, I couldn't stand the bitchiness and got out and never looked back.
Exactly. My deputy, Sarah, the general manager, first showed how much style mattered when she advertised for an office assistant and refused to hire the best qualified girl because she could not distinguish Missoni from Marc Jacobs. This girl would have been making tea and running errands, but I didn't challenge the decision not to hire her, because I had a policy of picking my battles carefully. Yeah, this is the battle you ought to have picked. The company's number 2 puts vapid air-headedness above the best interests of the business, and you don't question that.
It's always about pecking order. Women use shunning, but even the lowest guy in a group of guys will be protected by the group if attached. I saw a video about a guy with chickens that got a rooster. Before the rooster arrived, the hens were pecking another hen almost to death, but the rooster broke up those fights and the hen recovered. It is embarrassing being a member of a species with a huge brain that still act like freaking chickens.
When I was about 15, I worked for a large grocery store. In the deli section, the staff were all female except for me. 2 of the 30-years-old managers and assistant managers would always make jokes about me. One day they were teasing me about the facial hair I had started growing. I was going through puberty. That day at school, we had learned about harassment in the workplace. I told them that they were making fun of my appearance based solely on me being a boy, and I found it disrespectful, and if they continued, I would be forced to report them for harassment to the HR department. This was a joke, as I had literally heard this statement in class about 2 hours before my shift started after school. I was called to HR and given a written warning for being aggressive against the 2 women, and had to give a written and verbal apology to them, or I would be fired for harassment. This was 20 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that it was women only, it's that she didn't have a strong leader always present. She was too busy jetting around, and nobody was watching the store.
This is why I always laugh when people say men are more competitive than women. In this case, she probably hired a bunch of alphas without having the management chops to keep them in line. Outcome not surprising.
I don't know if competitiveness necessarily has to do with the outcome. It seems to do more with power structure or lack thereof. From my experience, it seems that a group of men establish a power structure and adhere to it far more readily than a group of women. It seems that women group dynamics focus far more on rule by consensus, and that lack of hierarchy could potentially set the stage for power struggles. The one thing men and women have in common is they both prefer the company of men. Benjamin Franklin.
Men have the ability to separate professional and personal. We know how to work together with people we don't like. It's an evolutionary trait. A man who couldn't put aside issues to join the hunt didn't eat, didn't feed his family, didn't survive.
I think it goes further than that. One of the main things the author mentioned was the sheer snideness and the behind-the-scenes gossip that was going on. Shit like that can destroy a person because it's a double whammy. Not only do they hate you, they won't even tell it to your face. Guys don't work like that. If we have a problem with someone, we're more likely to tell it straight to their face in a direct manner. Most of the time, it solves the problem faster than just letting it smolder under the covers.
Girls chatter while picking berries, boys shut the F up while following in line to kill the deer. I know it's a simple way to form the argument, but I bet it's probably got a lot to do with it.
I liked how by the end of it all she'd still learn nothing.
Just because they're all women doesn't mean that you can give them free reign of the office. From my observation, there is never a well-run office when the boss is afraid of being bad cop. Get a stern, tough as nails matronly type as the general manager who isn't afraid of being the biggest bitch in the whole place and firing anyone who doesn't toe the line, and then everyone in the office is united. They all hate the GM, but they fear her more.
Damn right. I think this has less to do with the gender-specific destructive behavior and more with having incompetent people on the roll. Fire the troublemakers, hire more professionally focused people to do what they're paid to do.
LOL. Every woman I know has at least one other woman at work she can't stand. Usually that other woman is prettier than she is or thinks she is.
I did a paper with my professor and another female student studying how women behave when men weren't around. We each infiltrated factions in this game called sorority life and observed how they strategized, communicated, and supported each other. I needed therapy by the time it was done. The group I was in were the ones who claimed to be the most feminine, loving, supportive, etc., and they were effing demonic to each other. The second group claimed to be neutral and they did nothing but stir up shit, and the third group, which was labeled as bullies, were the best of them all. They were honest with who they were, great strategists, and supported each other both in the game and out. Basically, they behaved like men.
How is it legal to have a women-only company? I am quite sure if it were men only that the feminazis would be circling the place, yelling their catchy little cadences,